If you like sci-fi stories, please like or subscribe to help our channel grow. Enjoy this story.
The Paradox Pawn. The Paradox Pawn. The rain had turned London into a shimmering maze of reflections, the city's neon signs and streetlights pooling in puddles along the cobblestone streets. Finn hated the rain. It wasn't the wetness that got to him. It was the way it made the world feel smaller, like everything was closing in. Umbrella in one hand, a second-hand chess manual in the other, he ducked into the nearest doorway for shelter. The small shop's bell jingled above him as he stepped inside, dripping water onto the worn wooden floor. Shelves cluttered with antiques and curios lined the walls, each item layered with dust. A faint smell of mildew hung in the air, mixing with something metallic. Finn had never been one for antiques. He preferred his distractions digital, but there was something about the place that felt inviting. "Oi, mate," Gwen's voice buzzed from his pocket. Finn fished out his phone, the screen glowing with her text. "You coming to the club tonight or nah?" he smirked. Gwen's idea of a club was a dingy basement filled with questionable music and even more questionable people. Finn, ever the introvert, had passed the last 10 invites. "Maybe," he typed back, knowing full well he wouldn't. As he tucked his phone away, something caught his eye. A chessboard, tucked into the corner of a dusty display case. Its pieces were jet black and bone white, each carved with intricate detail. The board itself looked ancient, with faint engravings along the edges that didn't resemble any language Finn had ever seen. "Interested?" A gravely voice startled him. Behind the counter stood an old man, his wrinkled face partially hidden beneath a flat cap. His eyes glinted with a sharpness that belied his frail appearance. Just looking," Finn said, though his gaze lingered on the board. "Chess player, are you?" The man's tone was more observation than question. Before Finn could respond, the shopkeeper shuffled over to the case, producing a tarnished key from his pocket. "This one's special, a real relic, you might say." Finn didn't ask for details, but the man lifted the chessboard out with a reverence that suggested he was about to share them anyway. "Legend has it, this board was used to play the most important game in history," he chuckled. Though the details, like most legends, are a bit fuzzy. Finn tilted his head, intrigued despite himself. "How much?" The shopkeeper's grin widened, revealing teeth that had long since seen better days. "For you, lad, 40 quid." It was a splurge for something he didn't need, but something about the board called to him. Finn handed over the cash, took the board, and stepped back into the rain, already feeling the first twinges of buyer's remorse. Back home, Finn set the board on his desk, clearing away the clutter of textbooks and game controllers to make room. Up close, it was even more intricate. The engravings along the edges formed patterns that seemed to shift when he glanced away, like shadows at the corner of his vision. He placed a black pawn in its starting position and slid it forward. Nothing happened, of course. It was just a board, after all. He leaned back in his chair, staring at it until his eyelids grew heavy. The next morning, the pawn wasn't where he'd left it. Finn blinked, groggy, as his eyes adjusted to the pale light filtering through his curtains. The pawn now stood 1 square further than before. He rubbed his eyes and leaned in, as if proximity might solve the mystery. Had he moved it in his sleep? No, he wasn't a sleepwalker, or a sleep player for that matter. Shaking off the unease, Finn headed to school, leaving the board on his desk. "You're late," Gwen said, her voice cutting through the din of students in the cafeteria. She'd claimed their usual spot by the window, a plastic tray of questionable spaghetti in front of her. "Got caught up with something," Finn replied, sitting across from her. She raised an eyebrow. "Caught up? You? Did the internet go down or something?" Finn hesitated, debating whether to tell her about the board. Gwen was his best friend, but she had a way of making him feel ridiculous for believing in anything outside the ordinary. "It's nothing," he said. Her eyes narrowed, but before she could press further, a notification buzzed on her phone. She glanced at it and sighed. "Great, another delay on the tube. London's falling apart, I swear." The word delay stuck in Finn's mind, though he wasn't sure why. He spent the rest of lunch half listening to Gwen's rants about infrastructure, his thoughts drifting back to the chessboard. That night, curiosity got the better of him. He placed another pawn on the board, this time sliding it diagonally. Hours later, Finn woke to find the piece gone. His heart raced as he searched the desk, convinced it had fallen somewhere. Then he saw it, back on the board in a new position as if it had moved itself. "This isn't normal," he muttered. The next day, Finn told Gwen. "You're joking," she said flatly, arms crossed as they stood in his room. "I'm serious," Finn insisted, pointing at the board. Gwen leaned over it, skeptical. "So what? The ghost of Gary Kasparov is haunting your bedroom?" "Just watch," Finn said. He slid a rook forward and stepped back. Minutes passed, Gwen's expression shifting from amused to bored. But then, as she turned to mock him again, the rook shifted. Neither of them touched it. It moved by itself, sliding to a new square with the faintest scrape of wood on wood. Gwen's eyes widened, and for the first time in their friendship, she was speechless. "That's not possible," she finally said. "Tell me about it," Finn replied, his voice trembling. The pieces on the chessboard gleamed under the dim light of his desk lamp. Their arrangement more than a game, it was a challenge. Finn didn't know who or what was playing against him, but he had a sinking feeling the stakes were far higher than he could imagine. The following days turned Finn's quiet life into a whirlwind of curiosity and paranoia. Every spare moment was spent at the chessboard, testing its limits and documenting each piece's movement. It was no longer a game, it was a puzzle, and Finn's shy demeanor masked an obsessive determination to solve it. Gwen, on the other hand, teetered between fascination and skepticism. She spent more time at Finn's house than usual, claiming it was for science, though Finn suspected she was simply enjoying the absurdity of it all. "All right, genius," Gwen said one evening, lounging on Finn's bed with a bag of crisps. "You've tested everything except what happens when you try to make an illegal move." Finn sat hunched over the chessboard, notebook open to a growing list of observations. "It doesn't work. I already tried moving a king into check. The board wouldn't let me." "Yeah, but what happens if you, force it?" Gwen suggested, tossing a crisp into her mouth. Finn glanced at her, unimpressed. "Force it? How exactly do you propose I?" "Like this." Gwen leaned forward and swiped a pawn off the board, her fingers snapping it into a square out of sequence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room seemed to hold its breath. A soft hum like the faint buzz of an electric current filled the air. The pawn vibrated, as if resisting its new placement, before snapping back to its original position. The force sent Gwen recoiling, and the piece clattered against the board with a finality that silenced them both. Finn stared at the board, heart pounding. "I told you, it won't let us break the rules." Gwen muttered something about weird voodoo chess, but didn't try again. A few nights later, the chessboard revealed its true power. Finn had been restless, his thoughts tangled in questions he couldn't answer. Who or what was behind the board? Why did it seem to know the rules better than he did? He slid a rook forward and sat back, watching. As usual, nothing happened immediately, but Finn was learning to be patient. He set an alarm on his phone and drifted to sleep. When he woke, the board was different. Not only had the rook moved on its own, but the pieces now formed a new configuration, one Finn didn't recognize from any standard opening. Confused, he reached for his phone and began researching historical chess matches. The formation looked familiar, but slightly wrong. After an hour of digging, he found it. A game played in 1212 during the Siege of Zaragoza. Only, the match he found wasn't quite the same. According to records, the black rook hadn't been in that position during the siege. "You're saying the board moved a piece back in time?" Gwen asked the next day, her tone incredulous. They were huddled in Finn's room again, the chessboard a silent witness between them. Finn nodded. "I think so. Look at this." He held up his phone, showing her the historical chess match. "The game changed after I moved that rook. The siege still happened, but now it ended 3 days earlier than it was supposed to." "And you think this is your doing?" Gwen said, arching an eyebrow. "Not think, no," Finn replied, his voice steady. "I've been tracking every move. The board is rewriting history, piece by piece." Gwen let out a low whistle. "Okay, that's insane. What's next? Dinosaurs in Trafalgar Square?" Finn didn't laugh. "It's not funny, Gwen. If the board can do this, what happens if someone else gets it? What happens if I mess up?" Gwen's smirk faded. "All right, let's say you're right. What's the plan? Because this is way above my pay grade." Finn didn't have an answer. The plan, as it turned out, was decided for them. It started small, a strange mention in the news about a minor historical anomaly, a medieval fortress in Spain found with extra defenses historians hadn't accounted for. Then came the knock at the door. Finn's mother answered it, calling up the stairs for him. "Finn, someone's here to see you." Finn frowned, confused. He wasn't expecting anyone. He exchanged a wary glance with Gwen before heading downstairs. A woman stood in the entryway, tall and poised, dressed in a black coat that seemed too pristine for the damp London weather. Her hair was tied back in a severe bun, and her eyes, sharp and calculating, were locked onto Finn with unsettling intensity. "Finn," she said, her voice smooth and commanding, "you've been making some interesting moves." "Who are you?" Finn asked, his throat suddenly dry. "You can call me the Black Queen," she said, stepping inside uninvited. Her presence seemed to fill the small hallway, and Finn's instincts screamed at him to run. "I don't know what you're talking about," he lied, his voice barely above a whisper. The Black Queen's lips curled into a faint smile. "Let's not waste time. You're clever enough to have figured out the chessboard's true nature by now, and I suspect you've realized how valuable it is." Finn's chest tightened. He glanced toward the stairs, wondering if Gwen was listening. "I don't know what you mean," he said again, more firmly this time. The Black Queen sighed, almost pityingly. "Do you know how long my organization has been searching for that board? Decades, Finn. Decades of painstaking work, tracking rumors and whispers, and now it's here, in the hands of a child." "I'm not a child," Finn snapped, surprising himself with the sharpness in his tone. The Black Queen raised an eyebrow. "Prove it. Join me." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. "Why would I do that?" Finn asked. "Because you're in over your head," she said simply. "The chessboard isn't just a toy. It's a tool, a weapon even. And if you keep playing with it, you're going to break something. Something big." Finn's mind raced, but before he could respond, the Black Queen produced a business card from her coat pocket and handed it to him. "Think it over. When you're ready, call me. But don't take too long, Finn. The world doesn't wait." With that, she turned and walked out, leaving Finn frozen in the hallway, the weight of her words pressing down on him. From the top of the stairs, Gwen's voice broke the silence. "Well, that's not ominous at all." Finn sat at his desk, staring at the chessboard, as if it might suddenly spring to life and answer the countless questions swirling in his head. The Black Queen's business card lay on the desk beside it, an elegant black square with only a phone number embossed in silver. No name, no title, just a number. Gwen paced behind him, her sneakers scuffing against the floorboards. "So, let me get this straight," she said, holding up her hands in mock surrender. "Not only is this chessboard rewriting history, but now we've got the Bond villain of chess trying to recruit you?" Finn didn't reply. His fingers hovered over the rook he'd moved 2 days ago, the one that had altered the siege of Zaragoza. It was a reminder of just how far this had already gone. "Earth to Finn," Gwen said, snapping her fingers. "What's the plan? You do have a plan, right?" "I don't know," Finn admitted, "but we can't trust her." "Obviously," Gwen said. "She literally called herself the Black Queen. Might as well twirl a mustache while she's at it." Finn turned to face her, his expression serious. "She said the board is a weapon. If that's true, then we need to figure out how to stop her from using it." Gwen folded her arms. "Stop her? Finn, you can barely make eye contact with the lunch lady. How are you going to stop a shadowy organization?" "I don't know yet," Finn said, his voice firmer than he expected. "But this thing, this board, it's dangerous. You've seen what it can do." Gwen sighed and flopped onto his bed. "Fine, but if we're doing this, we're doing it smart. Step 1, figure out what she wants with the board. Step 2, don't get killed." "Good plan," Finn muttered, rolling his eyes. "Real helpful." That evening, Finn decided to test the board again. He moved a knight forward, careful to follow the rules. Hours later, when the piece returned to its original position, Finn noticed a new ripple in the news, a minor change in the history of a long-forgotten battle during the 100 Years' War. It wasn't a major event, but the pattern was clear. Every move sent ripples across time, altering small details of the past. "You're playing with fire," Gwen said, standing in the doorway with a mug of tea. "I'm careful," Finn replied without looking up. Careful isn't the same as safe, she shot back. What if you move something that messes up? I don't know, the discovery of penicillin or the invention of crisps? Do you want that on your conscience? Finn sighed and leaned back in his chair. I have to understand it, Gwen. If I don't, then she'll use it against us. Gwen took a sip of her tea, eyeing him over the rim of her mug. You know what your problem is, Finn. You're too nice. You think you can fix everything by being careful, but sometimes you've got to take risks. That's easy for you to say, Finn muttered. You're not the one holding the chessboard. Gwen didn't reply. Instead, she set her mug on his desk and picked up one of the pawns. Then maybe it's time someone else took a turn. Before Finn could stop her, she slid the pawn forward. The air around them seemed to hum, just as it had before. Gwen smirked. See? Not so hard. Finn stared at her, his frustration bubbling over. Gwen, this isn't a game. You can't just... The hum grew louder, cutting him off. The pawn trembled on the board before sliding back to its original position, as if scolding her for the illegal move. Okay, that was weird, Gwen admitted, stepping back. You think? Finn said, exasperated. Later that night, Finn lay awake in bed, his thoughts a tangle of fear and determination. He couldn't ignore the Black Queen's warning, nor could he dismiss the power of the chessboard. But as much as he hated to admit it, Gwen was right. He couldn't afford to play it safe anymore. The next day, Finn and Gwen decided to investigate. They started with the business card. Finn's hands trembled as he dialed the number, half hoping it wouldn't connect. It did. Hello, Finn, the Black Queen's voice purred. How did you? Finn stammered, before realizing it didn't matter. Of course she'd know. Ready to join me? She asked, her tone as smooth as silk. I want answers, Finn said, his voice steadier than he felt. What do you want with the chessboard? Ah, straight to the point. I like that, she replied. The chessboard, Finn, is a tool, a means to an end, and that end is a better world. A better world for who? Finn shot back. For everyone, she said. You've seen what it can do. Imagine a world without war, without suffering. That's what I'm offering. Finn glanced at Gwen, who was mouthing, Don't trust her. He nodded slightly. And what happens to history? Finn asked. To all the people who don't fit into your better world? The Black Queen's tone grew colder. History is just a story, Finn, and like any story, it can be rewritten. Finn's stomach turned. You're not fixing anything. You're just playing God. You'd be surprised how similar the two are, she said. But you'll see soon enough. Call me when you're ready to step into the future. The line went dead. Friendly, isn't she? Gwen quipped, though her expression betrayed her unease. We need to find out more about her, Finn said. If she's been looking for the board for decades, there has to be some kind of trail. Gwen grinned. Leave that to me. I know a guy. Finn raised an eyebrow. You know a guy? Okay, I know a guy who knows a guy, she admitted. Point is, we'll get answers. That night, Finn sat alone with the chessboard, his mind racing. The Black Queen's words lingered, her vision of a better world gnawing at him. Could she be right? Could the chessboard really fix the past? He moved a bishop, watching as it slid into position. The board seemed to pulse faintly, as if responding to his growing determination. Whatever the Black Queen's plans were, Finn knew one thing: he wouldn't let her win. Finn's small bedroom had become a war room. His desk was cluttered with papers, and his laptop displayed a growing collection of bookmarked articles, historical anomalies, conspiracy theories, anything that might link the Black Queen to the chessboard. Gwen, sprawled on the bed with a notebook balanced on her knees, scribbled notes in her usual barely legible scrawl. I've got a lead, she said, chewing the end of her pen. There's this bloke, Professor Armitage, historian, bit of a nutter. He's been going on about temporal disruptions for years. People think he's a crackpot, but he's got a ton of research on anomalies that sound a lot like your chessboard. Finn looked up from his laptop. How do we find him? Gwen grinned. Lucky for you, he's giving a lecture tomorrow at the university. Something about the hidden hand of history. Sounds right up your alley. Finn's stomach churned at the thought of approaching a stranger, let alone attending a lecture. You're coming with me, right? Obviously, Gwen said, smirking. You'd fall apart without me. The university lecture hall was packed with students, professors, and the kind of conspiracy enthusiasts who looked like they spent too much time on internet forums. Finn and Gwen slipped into seats near the back, trying to blend in. Professor Armitage was a wiry man in his 60s, with a wild shock of white hair and a voice that carried effortlessly through the room. History, he began, pacing the stage, is not as fixed as we are led to believe. Events we consider immutable often contain peculiar deviations. He clicked to the next slide, revealing a grainy photograph of a medieval battlefield. This, he said, gesturing to the image, is the Siege of Zaragoza, but the records, both written and physical, have changed. Reinforcements that weren't supposed to arrive did. Finn felt a chill run down his spine. He leaned toward Gwen. "That's the one," he whispered. Gwen nodded, her eyes wide. "Some call it coincidence," Armitage continued, "but I call it evidence. Evidence of interference. Someone or something is manipulating our past." The room murmured with a mix of skepticism and intrigue. Gwen raised an eyebrow. "Bit dramatic, isn't he?" "Dramatic or not, he's onto something," Finn replied. As the lecture ended and the crowd dispersed, Finn and Gwen approached the professor. Up close, Armitage looked even more disheveled, his tie slightly askew and his glasses smudged. He was gathering his notes when Finn cleared his throat. "Professor Armitage?" Armitage looked up, startled. "Yes? Who's asking?" "I'm Finn. This is Gwen. We need your help." Armitage squinted at them. "Help with what?" Finn hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "We think we've found something that can change the past." Armitage's eyes narrowed. "What exactly have you found, young man?" Finn exchanged a glance with Gwen, then reached into his bag, pulling out a photo he'd taken of the chessboard. He slid it across the table. Armitage froze, his expression shifting from suspicion to astonishment. "Where did you get this?" "It's mine," Finn said. "I bought it at a pawn shop." The professor's hands trembled as he picked up the photo. "Do you have any idea what this is?" "That's what we were hoping you could tell us," Gwen interjected. Armitage leaned in, his voice low. "This is no ordinary artifact. If this is the chessboard I think it is, then you're holding a weapon of unimaginable power." Finn's stomach sank. "A weapon?" Armitage nodded. "The board is said to be an ancient tool designed to manipulate time itself. But it doesn't just alter history, it creates ripples, destabilizing everything we know. It's incredibly dangerous." Gwen tilted her head. "Dangerous how?" "Because time resists interference," Armitage said. "The more you use it, the more unstable the timeline becomes. Small changes might seem harmless, but they compound, creating fractures." Finn thought of the Siege of Zaragoza and the subtle changes in historical records. "What happens if the timeline breaks?" Armitage's expression darkened. "If the timeline collapses entirely, there's no fixing it. Everything, every possibility would collapse into one singularity. Reality itself could cease to exist." Finn felt the weight of Armitage's words settle over him like a storm cloud. He glanced at Gwen, who looked equally shaken. "Do you know who else might be after the board?" Finn asked. Armitage hesitated, then nodded. "There's a group, a shadowy organization that's been searching for it for decades. They call themselves the Concordia. Their leader, the Black Queen," Finn finished, his voice barely above a whisper. Armitage's eyes widened. "So, she's already found you." Back at Finn's house, the gravity of their situation weighed heavily on them. Armitage had given them more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. They couldn't afford to let the Black Queen gain control of the board. "What now?" Gwen asked, her usual bravado dulled. Finn stared at the chessboard, its pieces gleaming faintly in the dim light. "We fight back," Gwen snorted. "Fight back? With what exactly? A board game and a historian who looks like he sleeps in his clothes?" "We don't have a choice," Finn said. "The board is the only thing she wants. If we can figure out how to use it, maybe we can stop her." Gwen sighed, rubbing her temples. "All right, but if we're doing this, we need to be smart. No more random experiments. No more playing hero without a plan." Finn nodded, though his mind was already racing. The board was a weapon, yes, but it was also a tool. If he could learn to master it, maybe he could do more than stop the Black Queen. Maybe he could undo the damage it had already caused. Late that night, long after Gwen had gone home, Finn sat alone in his room staring at the chessboard. Slowly, deliberately, he moved a single piece, the queen. As the air around him began to hum, Finn felt a strange mix of fear and determination. The game had begun. The next morning, Finn woke to find the chessboard completely rearranged. Every piece had moved into a new configuration, one that didn't resemble any known game or strategy. His mind buzzed with questions, but one thing was clear: the board was responding to him. Finn barely had time to process the change before Gwen barged into his room, her expression grim. "We've got a problem." She dropped her phone onto his desk, the screen lit with a news article. The headline read, "Rare chessboard stolen from local pawnshop in break-in." Finn felt his stomach drop. "They're after it." "Yeah, and guess who's at the top of my suspect list," Gwen said. "Your new best friend, the Black Queen." "She's getting desperate," Finn muttered. "She must have tracked the board back to the shop." Gwen crossed her arms. "Which means we're running out of time. Did you figure anything out last night?" Finn hesitated. "The board moved on its own. I don't know what it means yet, but I think it's trying to tell me something." "Great," Gwen said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Your haunted chessboard has opinions. That's totally not terrifying." Later that afternoon, Gwen's guy who knows a guy came through. He sent her a message with an address, an old industrial building in the heart of London's Docklands. It was a location supposedly connected to the Black Queen's organization, Concordia. "This is either a trap or the dumbest idea we've ever had," Gwen said as they stood outside the building that evening. It loomed over them, its cracked windows and rusted metal siding giving it an abandoned, menacing feel. Finn adjusted the strap of his backpack where he'd hidden the chessboard. "We need answers. If they know anything about the board, this is our chance." Gwen sighed. "Fine, but if we get murdered, I'm blaming you." Inside, the building was even creepier than it looked. Dim light filtered through broken windows, casting long shadows across the dusty floor. Finn and Gwen moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. They didn't have to search for long. A faint glow led them to a back room where rows of monitors flickered with images of historical events. Battles, political summits, even mundane moments like markets in ancient cities, all playing out on the screens. "What is this place?" Finn whispered. "It's like history on surveillance," Gwen replied, her voice tinged with awe. Before Finn could respond, a voice cut through the silence. "I knew you'd come." They spun around to find the Black Queen standing in the doorway. She was flanked by two men in dark suits, their expressions cold and unreadable. "You've been busy, Finn," the Black Queen said, her tone almost amused, "but you've only scratched the surface of what the board can do." Finn took a step back, instinctively shielding Gwen. "What do you want with it?" The Black Queen smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "What I've always wanted, to set things right. The world is a mess, Finn. Wars, famine, corruption. It's all a product of bad decisions, made by people too short-sighted to see the bigger picture. The chessboard is our chance to fix it." "By rewriting history?" Finn shot back. "You're not fixing anything. You're just replacing one mess with another." The Black Queen's expression hardened. "You're young, so I'll forgive your naivety, but let me show you what's at stake." She gestured to the monitors. With a wave of her hand, they shifted to display images of war-torn landscapes, starving populations, and environmental collapse. "This is our future," she said, "unless we change the past." Finn's chest tightened. The images were overwhelming, but he couldn't ignore the sense of manipulation in her words. "And what about the people you erase in the process? The lives that get rewritten or destroyed?" The Black Queen's jaw tightened. "Sacrifices must be made. You'll understand that when you're older." Before Finn could respond, Gwen stepped forward. "Yeah, well, maybe we're not big fans of your little dictatorship." The Black Queen's eyes narrowed. Brave words from someone so uninformed, but no matter, the board will be mine soon enough. She nodded to her guards, who advanced toward them. Gwen grabbed Finn's arm. "Run!" They sprinted through the building, weaving between rusted machinery and piles of debris. The guards were fast, but Finn and Gwen knew how to navigate tight spaces. They burst through a side door into the alley, breathless but alive. "Okay," Gwen panted. "New rule. We don't go poking around creepy buildings anymore." Finn clutched his backpack, his mind racing. "We need to move faster. She's going to come after us harder now." "What's the plan, genius?" Gwen asked. Finn looked at the chessboard, still tucked safely in his bag. "We fight back." Back at Finn's house, they regrouped. Finn stared at the chessboard, the pieces still arranged in the mysterious pattern it had formed overnight. "What are you thinking?" Gwen asked. "The board? It's not just a tool. It's a game," Finn said. "I think it's waiting for me to make my next move." "Then let's make it count," Gwen said, her tone resolute. Finn nodded, his hand hovering over a knight. Slowly, deliberately, he slid it into position. The board began to hum softly, the pieces glowing faintly. Gwen stepped back, her eyes wide. "What's happening?" she whispered. "I don't know," Finn admitted, "but whatever it is, it's just the beginning." As the hum faded, Finn felt a strange certainty settle over him. The board wasn't just a weapon or a tool, it was a challenge, and if he was going to stop the Black Queen, he'd have to win. The chessboard had come alive. The glow from its pieces pulsed faintly, synchronized with a low, steady hum that filled Finn's room. Gwen stood frozen, her eyes darting between Finn and the board. "What did you just do?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Finn swallowed hard, his hand still hovering over the knight he'd moved. "I think I made my next move." The hum began to fade, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. The board now displayed a configuration Finn didn't recognize, halfway between a standard chess layout and something entirely alien. Before he could study it further, his phone buzzed on the desk. He grabbed it, his heart sinking as he read the notification. "Breaking news. London Underground temporarily closed due to unexplained malfunction." "Great," Gwen muttered, peering over his shoulder. "That's got chessboard shenanigans written all over it." Finn frowned. "The Underground? That doesn't make sense. I moved a knight. What does that have to do with trains?" Gwen raised an eyebrow. "Maybe the board doesn't care about your logic. Maybe it's just playing its own game." Finn sat back, rubbing his temples. If every move is going to cause something like this, how are we supposed to stop her? Every decision could make things worse. Gwen placed a hand on his shoulder. "Then we make smarter decisions. If the board's playing a game, we just need to figure out the rules." That night, Finn couldn't sleep. He sat at his desk, staring at the chessboard, willing it to reveal its secrets. The strange new arrangement of pieces felt deliberate, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. He grabbed his notebook and began sketching the board's current layout. As he worked, an idea began to take shape. The positions weren't random, they mirrored a historical battle. Specifically, one from the Napoleonic Wars. "Of course," Finn murmured, "the board's trying to show me something." The next day, Gwen dragged Finn to the library, muttering about how she'd never expected to willingly step inside one. They pored over old history books, trying to piece together what the board's configuration might mean. "Here," Finn said, pointing to a page. "The Battle of Leipzig. It's one of the largest battles of the Napoleonic Wars. The positions on the board match the troop formations." Gwen frowned. "Okay, but what's the board trying to tell us? That we need to go back and help Napoleon win?" "Not exactly," Finn said, chewing his lip. "But maybe it's showing us what happens if we make the wrong move. If the Black Queen gets the board, she could rewrite history on a scale like this." "And turn the world into her own personal dictatorship," Gwen finished, her voice grim. "Yeah, no thanks." As they left the library, Finn's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from an unknown number. "You're making progress. Let's see if you can keep up." Finn's blood ran cold. "She's watching us." "Brilliant," Gwen said, rolling her eyes. "Now we've got Big Brother with a chessboard." Finn looked around, half expecting to see someone following them. The streets were busy, but no one seemed out of place. Still, the message made one thing clear. The Black Queen wasn't just waiting for him to make a mistake. She was actively goading him into playing. "We need to stay ahead of her," Finn said. "If she knows what the board can do, then she's probably been using it for years. She'll anticipate every move we make." Gwen smirked. "Well, lucky for you, I'm an expert at doing the unexpected." That night, back at Finn's house, they devised a plan. If the board was showing historical battles, then perhaps its movements were connected to key moments in history, the kind that shaped the world as they knew it. "We need to think strategically," Finn said, pacing the room. "If I make the next move, it has to count. Something that throws her off balance." Gwen nodded. "And while you're doing that, I'll dig into her organization. If she's been using the board, there has to be a trail, some way to figure out her endgame." Finn hesitated. Are you sure? If she finds out you're digging, she won't just sit back and watch. Gwen grinned. Please, I've been dodging detention for years. She's got nothing on me. The next move came at dawn. Finn had spent the night studying the board, analyzing every possible outcome. Finally, he reached for the queen and slid it diagonally across the board. The hum returned, louder this time, accompanied by a faint vibration that rattled the pieces. Gwen, who had dozed off in the corner, jolted awake. Did you? Finn nodded, his eyes fixed on the board. It's reacting. The pieces began to rearrange themselves, their movements slow and deliberate. When they settled, the board displayed a new formation, one that sent a chill down Finn's spine. It's a stalemate, he said, his voice barely audible. Gwen frowned. Isn't that bad? It's worse than bad, Finn said. It means we're running out of moves. Hours later, news broke of a mysterious event in Berlin. A historical monument had inexplicably vanished, replaced by an empty square. The anomaly sent shockwaves through the world, with scientists and historians scrambling for answers. Finn and Gwen watched the coverage in silence, the implications weighing heavily on them. She's escalating, Finn said. She's forcing my hand. Then we need to hit back harder, Gwen replied. We can't let her keep the upper hand. Finn stared at the chessboard, his mind racing. The game was nearing its climax, and every move carried the weight of the timeline itself. He clenched his fists. If she wants to play, then let's play. The chessboard was glowing again, its hum more insistent than ever. Finn stood over it, studying the new configuration. The pieces seemed to taunt him, daring him to make the next move. Gwen leaned against the desk, her arms crossed, her face set in a mixture of worry and determination. So, what's the play? She asked. Finn shook his head. I don't know yet. Every move feels like a gamble. Well, we don't have time to overthink it, Gwen said. You saw the news, that monument in Berlin disappearing? That's her move. She's baiting you. Finn sighed, running a hand through his hair. I need to think strategically. If I make the wrong move, the board could cause another ripple, or worse. Gwen stepped closer, her voice softer. Look, Finn, I know this is terrifying, but you're the best chess player I know. You've got instincts for this. Trust them. Finn glanced at her, her confidence in him a rare anchor in the storm of his thoughts. Okay, he said, taking a deep breath. Let's see what the board wants. He reached for the king and slid it forward one square. The response was immediate. The hum deepened, and the board's glow intensified. The pieces began to shift on their own, rearranging into a new configuration that Finn couldn't recognize. His phone buzzed seconds later. It was another message from the unknown number. Bold move. But are you ready for the consequences? Hours later, the world was abuzz with news of yet another anomaly. This time, an ancient shipwreck in the Mediterranean had been discovered fully intact, its wood unweathered by centuries under the sea. Historians were baffled, but Finn and Gwen knew what it meant. The Black Queen was responding. She's upping the stakes, Gwen said, pacing the room. She's trying to force your hand. Finn nodded, his mind racing. Every move we make, every ripple we cause, it's all leading somewhere. I just don't know where. Well, we're not going to figure it out sitting here, Gwen said. If this is a game, then we need more information. She's playing the long game, and we're still guessing her strategy. Finn hesitated. Armitage. What about him? Gwen asked. He might know more, Finn said. If this board has a purpose beyond rewriting history, maybe he's uncovered something about its design. Then let's pay the professor another visit, Gwen said. They found Professor Armitage in his office, surrounded by stacks of dusty books and papers. He looked up as they entered, his expression wary. You again, he said, setting down his pen. What trouble have you brought me this time? Finn placed the chessboard's photograph on the desk. We need answers. The Black Queen is using the board, and we're running out of time. Armitage leaned back in his chair, studying them. If she's activated the board, then the timeline is already fragile. Every move risks breaking it entirely. We know that, Gwen said, her frustration evident. What we don't know is how to stop her. Armitage sighed, rubbing his temples. The board wasn't designed to save history. It's meant to collapse it. Finn blinked, stunned. Collapse it? Why? To merge all timelines into one, Armitage explained. The board is a relic from an era long forgotten, a failed attempt to unify reality. Every move it makes pulls threads from alternate histories, converging them. If it continues, all possibilities will collapse into a single timeline. Finn felt the weight of the professor's words settle on his shoulders. And the Black Queen wants that? She believes it will create a perfect world, Armitage said. One where she controls the outcome. But the truth is, it's impossible to control. The collapse will destroy everything. Gwen stepped forward, her voice sharp. Then we stop her. How do we stop the board? Armitage hesitated. The board can only be stopped by ending the game. But to do that, you must defeat your opponent. Finn's stomach churned. You mean I have to beat her at her own game? Yes, Armitage said. But be warned, she's been playing far longer than you. That night, Finn sat alone in his room, staring at the chessboard. The pieces were still, their glow dimmed, but he could feel the weight of the game pressing down on him. Every move brought them closer to the end, but he didn't know if he was leading them to victory or disaster. Gwen entered quietly, setting a mug of tea on the desk. You okay? No, Finn admitted, but I don't have a choice. You're not alone in this, Gwen said, her voice firm. Whatever happens, I've got your back. Finn gave her a small, grateful smile. Thanks, Gwen. She nodded. Now, get some rest. You're going to need it. The next morning, Finn made his move. He slid a pawn forward, the simplest move he could think of. The board hummed, its glow intensifying as the pieces rearranged themselves. The next configuration was unlike anything he'd seen, a complex weave of possibilities, each one more daunting than the last. His phone buzzed again. Another message. Checkmate is closer than you think. Finn stared at the screen, his resolve hardening. The Black Queen was waiting, but he wasn't going to let her win. Your move, he whispered. The air in Finn's room felt heavier than usual, the hum of the chessboard resonating in his chest. The pieces were still, arranged in an intricate formation that seemed to defy all known strategies. Finn knew that the next move could determine everything, not just the outcome of the game, but the fate of the timeline itself. Gwen sat cross-legged on his bed, watching him with an expression that wavered between concern and determination. So, what's the plan? Please tell me you have a plan. Finn stared at the board, his mind racing. It's not about plans anymore. It's about playing smart. Every move she's made has been calculated to force me into a corner. If I'm going to beat her, I need to think outside the rules. Gwen leaned forward. What does that even mean? It means, Finn said slowly, I need to stop reacting and start acting. The next message from the Black Queen came as they were debating their next steps. Finn's phone buzzed with a new notification. Meet me at the tower. The final move awaits. Finn's stomach tightened as he read the words. She's calling me out. Gwen peered over his shoulder. The tower? As in the Tower of London? Finn nodded. She wants to finish this in person. Of course she does, Gwen said, rolling her eyes. Because what's a high-stakes chess match without a dramatic location? Finn couldn't bring himself to laugh. If I don't go, she'll just keep escalating. The board won't stop until the game is finished. Then we go, Gwen said firmly. But we go together. No way I'm letting you face her alone. That evening, they made their way to the Tower of London. The historic landmark loomed against the dark sky, its ancient stone walls bathed in the glow of floodlights. The usually bustling area was eerily quiet, as if the city itself knew something was about to happen. Finn clutched his backpack, the weight of the chessboard a constant reminder of the stakes. Are you sure about this? He asked Gwen as they approached the gates. Not even a little, she replied, but let's do it anyway. They entered the tower, the silence inside even more oppressive than the world outside. The Black Queen was waiting for them in the central courtyard, her dark coat billowing slightly in the wind. A small, portable chessboard sat on a stone pedestal in front of her, its pieces already arranged in the same configuration as Finn's. Welcome, Finn, she said, her voice echoing off the ancient walls. I've been waiting. Finn stepped forward, his heart pounding. This ends tonight. The Black Queen smiled, a cold, calculating expression. Indeed it does. The final move is yours. Make it wisely. Finn sat across from her, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He reached for a piece, then hesitated. Every move he considered felt like a trap, each possibility leading to disaster. But as he studied the board, something shifted in his mind. The patterns, the strategies, it all began to click. He moved his knight, placing it in a position that seemed inconsequential. The Black Queen raised an eyebrow, but didn't speak. She countered with her queen, her movements deliberate and precise. Finn glanced at Gwen, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. He took a deep breath and made his next move, sliding a bishop into place. The Black Queen frowned, the first crack in her composure. "You've been playing defensively this whole time," she said. "But now, you're attacking." Finn didn't reply. He was in the zone, his focus unshakable. Move by move, the game unfolded, each decision bringing him closer to the end. The tension in the air was palpable, every piece on the board a potential turning point. Then, it happened. Prodigy. Finn moved his rook, trapping the Black Queen's king. She stared at the board, her expression unreadable. "Checkmate," Finn said quietly. The Black Queen looked up at him, a flicker of something. Respect, resentment, crossing her face. "You've won the game, but the consequences are far from over." The chessboard on the pedestal began to hum, its glow intensifying until it was almost blinding. Finn and Gwen stepped back as the pieces rearranged themselves one final time. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, the board went dark. "What just happened?" Gwen asked, her voice shaking. Finn stared at the now ordinary chessboard, his heart still racing. "The game is over." "But what about the timeline?" Gwen pressed. "Did we fix it, or—" Before Finn could answer, the Black Queen spoke. "The board has returned to its dormant state. The timelines will stabilize, for now. But this is far from over." She turned to leave, her coat sweeping behind her. "You've proven yourself, Finn, but remember, the chessboard always finds its way back to the game, and when it does, I'll be waiting." The walk home was silent, the weight of what they'd just experienced settling over them. When they reached Finn's house, Gwen finally broke the silence. "So, what now?" Finn looked at her, then at the chessboard tucked safely in his bag. "Now, we make sure this board stays out of the wrong hands." Gwen grinned. "Guess that means we're officially Time's guardians or something." "Pretty cool, huh?" Finn smiled, a small spark of hope lighting in his chest. "Yeah, pretty cool." As the sun rose over London, Finn placed the chessboard in a secure box, locking it away. The game was over, for now, but he knew the battle for time was far from finished. Days passed, but the lingering tension of the final game clung to Finn and Gwen like a shadow. The chessboard remained locked in its box, untouched, yet its presence was impossible to ignore. Every odd news report, every unexplained event, left them wondering if the board's influence had truly ended, or if the Black Queen had been right about the consequences still unfolding. "Tell me again why we're hiding this thing in your room," Gwen asked, eyeing the locked box on Finn's shelf. "Because it's better here than anywhere she might find it," Finn replied, though even he wasn't convinced. "If I hand it over to someone else, who's to say they won't misuse it?" Gwen sighed, flopping onto the bed. "Fair point, but it still feels like sitting on a ticking time bomb." Finn stared at the box, his thoughts tangled. The Black Queen's words echoed in his mind. The chessboard always finds its way back to the game. Was it really over, or had they only postponed the inevitable? That evening, the first sign of trouble appeared. Gwen burst into Finn's room, clutching her phone. "Turn on the news, now." Finn grabbed the remote and switched on the TV. The screen displayed live footage from central London. Big Ben was glowing faintly, its hands spinning backward. Crowds had gathered, their murmurs audible even through the broadcast. "Authorities are baffled," the reporter said. "The phenomenon began less than an hour ago, and experts are unable to explain how or why it's happening." Finn's stomach dropped. "It's the board." Gwen's eyes widened. "But you locked it up. How is it still causing this?" Finn shook his head, his pulse quickening. "I don't know, but we have to stop it." They opened the box together, half expecting the board to glow or hum ominously. Instead, it lay still, its pieces exactly as Finn had left them. Yet the air around it felt different, charged, as if the board was pulsing with invisible energy. Finn hesitated. "Something's wrong. It's like it's active without being used." "That doesn't even make sense," Gwen said, exasperated. "It's a board. It doesn't have a mind of its own, right?" Finn didn't answer. Instead, he reached for the queen piece, lifting it carefully. The instant his fingers touched it, a wave of dizziness hit him. He staggered back, his vision swimming with images, fractured timelines, colliding realities, moments that seemed to blend and blur into chaos. Finn, Gwen grabbed his arm, steadying him. What happened? He blinked, the visions fading. The timelines, they're unraveling. The next move was obvious. They had to confront the Black Queen. Whatever was happening, she was the only one who might have answers. But contacting her meant taking a risk they weren't sure they could afford. Gwen paced the room, her brow furrowed. She said the board finds its way back to the game. Maybe that's what's happening. It's trying to pull us, or her, back in. Then we don't have a choice, Finn said. We need to find her. And how exactly do we do that? Gwen asked. Finn pulled out the business card she'd given him, the silver-embossed number now seeming more like a lifeline than a threat. We call. The Black Queen agreed to meet them at a neutral location, the British Museum, after hours. The grandeur of the empty halls only heightened the tension as Finn and Gwen waited near the Rosetta Stone. The chessboard was safely tucked in Finn's backpack, its weight a constant reminder of the stakes. She arrived alone, her dark coat sweeping the floor as she approached. I wondered how long it would take. Cut the theatrics, Gwen said, crossing her arms. The board's going haywire, and we think you know why. The Black Queen's lips twitched into a faint smile. Ah, the arrogance of youth. You believe you can control something you barely understand. Finn stepped forward, his voice steady. Then explain it to us. What's happening? The Black Queen studied him for a moment before gesturing to a nearby bench. Very well, let me show you. She pulled a small device from her coat, a sleek tablet-like screen. As she activated it, holographic images of the timelines appeared, their once clean strands now tangled and fraying. The board isn't just a tool for rewriting history, she explained. It's a stabilizer. It keeps the timelines coherent. But every time you use it, you weaken its ability to maintain balance. And now, it's failing. Finn's heart sank. So this is our fault? Partially, the Black Queen admitted. But the fault lies with the board itself. It was never meant to last forever. Then how do we fix it? Gwen demanded. The Black Queen's expression hardened. You can't. The only way to prevent total collapse is to let the board complete its purpose. Finn frowned. What do you mean, complete its purpose? To merge the timelines, she said simply. To bring everything into one singular reality. Finn shook his head. But that will destroy everything. No, she corrected. It will destroy possibilities, but it will create order, a single, perfect timeline. Gwen scoffed. Perfect? According to who? You? The Black Queen didn't answer, her gaze fixed on Finn. You have a choice, Finn. Let the board collapse the timelines and save what remains, or keep fighting and risk losing everything. The weight of the decision pressed down on Finn. The chessboard was more than just a game now. It was a choice between chaos and control, between countless possibilities and one definitive reality. Gwen placed a hand on his shoulder. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. Finn nodded, his mind racing. He glanced at the Black Queen, then at the chessboard, the glow of its pieces casting long shadows across the room. Finally, he spoke. I'll make the final move. The chessboard felt heavier in Finn's hands than it ever had before. It wasn't just an artifact anymore. It was the fulcrum upon which the fate of every timeline rested. The Black Queen stood opposite him, her cold gaze fixed on him as if daring him to falter. Gwen hovered nearby, her presence a steadying force amid the chaos swirling in Finn's mind. This is your moment, Finn, the Black Queen said softly. The pawn becomes the king. Make your move. Finn set the chessboard down on the stone pedestal in the museum's hall. Its faint hum intensified, filling the air with a resonance that seemed to vibrate in his very bones. The pieces rearranged themselves into a final configuration, a pattern that mirrored no game Finn had ever seen. Yet somehow, he knew it was right. Gwen leaned in, her voice low. So what's the play? Finn stared at the board, his fingers twitching over the knight. It's not just about winning. If I make the wrong move, the timelines collapse completely. Then don't screw up, Gwen said, her attempt at levity barely masking her fear. The Black Queen stepped forward. The board is waiting, Finn. Choose wisely. End the chaos or let the multiverse spiral into oblivion. Finn's chest tightened. Every instinct screamed at him to protect the infinite possibilities of the timelines, to fight against the collapse. But Armitage's warnings and the Black Queen's dire predictions haunted him. The chessboard's purpose was undeniable. It was designed to converge everything into one coherent reality. But whose reality? Finn moved a pawn forward, an unassuming, almost mundane choice. The air grew still, and the board's glow dimmed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft click, the Black Queen's king toppled over. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice sharp. Finn stood straight, his gaze locked on hers. The game wasn't about power or control. It was about balance. The chessboard began to shimmer, its pieces dissolving into light. Finn and Gwen stepped back as the glow expanded, enveloping the room in a warm golden hue. "This isn't the end," the Black Queen whispered, her voice tinged with a strange mix of awe and fear. "No," Finn replied, "it's a new beginning." The light grew brighter, washing over them completely. Finn felt a strange tugging sensation, as if he were being pulled apart and reassembled all at once. Images flashed through his mind, memories, alternate realities, moments that had never been but somehow felt familiar. He saw Gwen's father alive, smiling as he held her as a child. He saw the Black Queen, younger, before her ambition had hardened her heart. And he saw himself, standing before the chessboard, just as he was now. When the light faded, they were back in Finn's room. The chessboard was gone. Gwen blinked, looking around. Did it work?" Finn opened his mouth to answer, but the words caught in his throat. His phone buzzed on the desk, and he grabbed it, scrolling through the news. No anomalies, no mysterious phenomena. Everything was normal. "I think it did," Finn said, his voice barely above a whisper. Gwen grinned. "Well, that's a relief. I was starting to think we'd end up stuck in some alternate timeline where cats ruled the world or something." Finn laughed, a genuine, unrestrained laugh that felt like the first in ages. That might have been easier. As they sat in the quiet of Finn's room, a small envelope slid through the crack under the door. Finn picked it up, his heart racing. Inside was a single card, embossed with the Black Queen's signature silver script. "The game never truly ends. But you've earned a reprieve. For now." Finn folded the card and set it aside, his thoughts racing. The chessboard was gone, but its legacy remained, a reminder that even the smallest moves could shape the future. Months later, Finn and Gwen sat on a bench overlooking the Thames, the city bustling around them. Life had returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could after what they'd been through. "So, what now?" Gwen asked, tossing a pebble into the river. Finn shrugged. "We move forward, one step at a time." She smirked. "Sounds boring." "Maybe," Finn said, smiling. "But after everything, I think I could use a little boring." Gwen laughed, leaning back against the bench. "Fair enough. Just promise me one thing." "What's that?" Finn asked. "If another magical chessboard shows up, you let me smash it first." Finn chuckled, the weight of the past finally beginning to lift. "Deal." As the sun set over London, they sat in companionable silence, the ripples on the water, a quiet reminder of the choices they'd made and the possibilities that still lay ahead. Do you think Finn made the right choice by ending the game? What might you have done differently?
Thank you. We hope you enjoyed this sci-fi story. Please like or subscribe to help this channel grow.